The water around Marcus grew choppy as Deborah's electric boat circled closer, its LED underbody lights creating an eerie blue glow beneath the surface. Two more boats appeared from around the bend, sleek pontoons with lakeside security emblazoned on their sides. "Ma'am, should we escort him to shore?" called one of the security men, a former high school linebacker whose polo shirt strained against his chest. Deborah's perfectly highlighted bob caught the moonlight as she tilted her head in consideration. "Let's document everything first. The Homeowners Association has a zero-tolerance policy for trespassers." She raised her phone, its flash momentarily blinding Marcus. Despite the absurdity of being treated like an intruder on his own property, Marcus maintained his composure. 10 years working in emergency medicine had taught him that escalating tension never helped the situation. "Mrs. Harrington Brooks," he said, treading water calmly, "if you'd allow me to return to my dock, I can provide identification and documentation of ownership." She scoffed. "Everyone who gets caught claims to be just visiting family or friends with the owner. The Richardson property has been abandoned for years. We've had to increase security because of squatters." One of her companions leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She nodded knowingly. "If you are who you claim to be," she said with exaggerated patience, "you should be aware that the HOA has implemented strict regulations about lake usage. Swimming is only permitted between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m., and night swimming requires special approval and safety lighting." Marcus fought the urge to laugh. "I wasn't aware I needed permission to swim on my own property." "This lake is a shared resource," Deborah retorted, her voice sharpening. "Your uncle may have owned the house, but the lake belongs to the community now." As Marcus swam toward his dock, he noticed several residents had emerged on their decks across the water, watching the confrontation unfold. Some had their phones out, recording the incident. He could already imagine the community message board lighting up. *intruder apprehended in Richardson Cove*. Reaching the ladder, Marcus pulled himself from the water with practiced efficiency. Standing at his full height on the dock, water streaming from his shoulders, he turned to face Deborah's flotilla. "My name is Dr. Marcus Richardson. I inherited this property from my Uncle Richard last month. I have every legal right to be here." Deborah's eyes narrowed at the mention of his profession. The security men exchanged uncertain glances. "Doctor or not," she said, recovering quickly, "the rules apply to everyone. The HOA has invested over $200,000 in lake maintenance over the past 5 years. We've removed dangerous underwater hazards, regulated water quality, and established safety protocols." Marcus reached for his towel, wrapping it around his waist. "That's very interesting, considering my uncle's trust has been paying for quarterly environmental assessments and water quality monitoring since before your subdivision existed." Something flickered across Deborah's face, a momentary uncertainty quickly masked by indignation. She tapped her phone screen decisively. "We'll let the authorities sort this out. If you're legitimate, you have nothing to worry about." She turned to her companions. "Dave, stay with your boat and keep an eye on him. Ken, come with me to meet the officers at the gate." As the main boat pulled away, Marcus heard Deborah's voice carry across the water, "And have Mitch pull up the property records right away. Something doesn't add up here." Marcus smiled to himself, thinking of the extensive documentation waiting in his uncle's study. If Deborah wanted to see property records, she was in for quite a surprise. The live-stream comments scrolled faster as Deborah fumbled to end the broadcast. Mitchell stepped forward, lawyer mode fully engaged. "Let's all take a breath here," he said, voice calibrated for courtroom reasonableness. "Clearly there's been a misunderstanding about property boundaries." Marcus leaned against the patio railing. "Is it a misunderstanding when your company's brochures advertise exclusive lake rights for properties you knew were built on leased access?" The county assessor pulled another document from her folder. "I have the original easement agreement here. It specifically prohibits permanent structures extending more than 10 feet into the water without express written permission from the Richardson Trust." She looked pointedly at Deborah. "Your floating entertainment platform extends nearly 40 feet into the lake." Deborah's phone buzzed continuously with incoming messages. She glanced at it briefly, then paled. The HOA board is calling an emergency meeting. Tonight. Officer Dawson chuckled. Might be the first time Lakeside Heights has had a quorum. Mitchell straightened his tie again, a nervous tell Marcus had noticed in many witnesses during medical malpractice depositions. Dr. Richardson, perhaps we should discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. Like the arrangement you offered my clinic? The one where we'd be relocated to a facility 1/3 the size with double the rent? Marcus shook his head. I don't think so. Officer Jenkins, who had been quietly inspecting the property maps, suddenly pointed to a small notation near the eastern shore. Ms. Wilson, what's this marking here? The assessor leaned closer. That's interesting. According to this, there's a protected species of aquatic plant in that cove, one with documented medicinal properties. She glanced at Marcus. Your uncle registered it with the State Environmental Protection Office in 2018. Marcus remembered the journals he'd found earlier that day. Lakeside lilyroot. My uncle discovered it had remarkable anti-inflammatory properties. We've been using derivatives in our clinic's pain management program. Mitchell's professional composure cracked slightly. That's the proposed marina location. Marina? Officer Dawson's eyebrows shot up. Since when is there a marina planned for Richardson Cove? Deborah's gaze darted nervously between her husband and the officers. It's just a small private dock expansion. For residents only. The county assessor flipped through her documents. I don't see any permit applications for a marina development. They're still in preparation, Mitchell said smoothly. Very preliminary planning stages. Marcus crossed his arms. Let me guess. The marina would be managed by Lakeside Ventures, with residents paying annual slip fees. Deborah's phone chimed again with an incoming call. The screen showed Mayor Tompkins before she hurriedly silenced it. The mayor is involved in this too, Marcus asked incredulously. He's a close personal friend, Deborah replied, chin lifting defiantly. He understands the importance of property values and development. Officer Dawson exchanged a look with his partner. And he's up for re-election in November, with Lakeside Heights being the largest voting bloc in the county. The pieces were falling into place for Marcus, the aggressive development company, the political connections, the targeted attack on his clinic, the unauthorized lake structures. This wasn't just about Deborah's entitled attitude. It was a calculated land grab disguised as community improvement. I think, Marcus said slowly, it's time to discuss exactly what rights the Richardson Trust is willing to grant, and to whom. The morning sun glinted off the new sign at the lakefront. Richardson Lake Nature Preserve and Healing Center. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Marcus stood beside a group of volunteers planting native species along the shoreline, many of them residents from Lakeside Heights. Dr. Richardson, where should we plant these water lilies? Asked a teenage girl, her Lakeside Academy shirt already smudged with soil. Follow the markers Professor Chen set up, Marcus replied, gesturing toward a woman in wildest taking water samples nearby. She's mapped the optimal spots for each species. The transformation had been remarkable. After that night's revelations, the emergency HOA meeting had dissolved into chaos, with residents demanding answers about their property rights and lake access. Mitchell had attempted damage control, but the live stream had exposed too much. What no one expected was Marcus's solution. That's the last of the recycled dock material, announced a familiar voice behind him. Deborah approached, carrying a clipboard and wearing a lake restoration volunteer cap instead of her designer athleisure wear. The environmental science students from the community college have repurposed it into nesting platforms for the waterfowl. Marcus nodded appreciatively. Your organizational skills have been invaluable. Instead of revoking access or leveraging his ownership for profit, Marcus had offered the community a partnership. His terms: dismantle the unauthorized structures, drop opposition to his clinic, and participate in the restoration and maintenance of the lake ecosystem. In return, he formalized their access rights and established the Healing Center, a satellite location of his inner-city clinic that provided both conventional and natural medicine, including treatments derived from the lakeside lilyroot. Across the water, Mitchell supervised a crew removing the last sections of what would have been the marina. The district attorney's investigation into the mayor and zoning board had scuttled those plans permanently. Mitchell had narrowly avoided indictment by cooperating fully and committing his firm's resources to environmental restoration projects. The community college called, Deborah said, checking her clipboard. They want to know if you'll conduct another workshop on medicinal plants next month. Tell them yes, Marcus replied, and ask if they'd be interested in establishing a permanent botany program here. My uncle's journals mention at least a dozen other plants with potential medicinal properties. A canoe glided past, carrying Officer Dawson and 2 children with fishing rods. He waved cheerfully. Since the confrontation, he'd become a regular visitor, sharing stories about Richard and helping Marcus restore the main house. You know, Deborah said carefully, when I first moved here, Richard showed me these amazing water lilies. He said they only bloom at night, and their fragrance could ease headaches instantly. I thought he was just a quirky old man. He was, Marcus smiled. But he was right about the lilies. Deborah hesitated. I never properly apologized for that night. You've done more than apologize, Marcus said, gesturing at the transformed shoreline. You've helped build something better. From the dock, someone called Marcus's name. Elena from the clinic was arriving with a group of inner-city children for their first Lake Healing Day, a program where urban kids could experience nature and learn about environmental stewardship. As Marcus walked toward them, he glanced back at the house where he now lived full-time. His uncle's journal sat on the porch railing, pages fluttering in the breeze. The final entry remained unfinished, but Marcus had recently added his own words beneath his uncle's last line. The lake still heals all wounds. Marcus stood on the weathered dock, watching sunset paint the lake in amber hues. His uncle's journal lay open in his hands, the pages slightly warped from decades of lakeside reading. The more he read, the more he understood why Richard had been so protective of this place. 4 developers in 3 years, Marcus muttered, flipping through detailed accounts of increasingly aggressive purchase offers. His uncle had documented everything, from thinly veiled threats about eminent domain to bizarre accidents, where survey stakes mysteriously appeared on his property overnight. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before Richard's death, described a heated confrontation with someone named Deborah Harrington Brooks, who had demanded Richard remove his eyesore of a boathouse because it destroyed the aesthetic value of her newly constructed lakefront mansion visible across the water. The lake house itself was smaller than Marcus remembered, a rustic 3-bedroom cabin built from local timber that had weathered to a silvery gray. Inside, time seemed suspended. Medical journals from the 1980s still lined the bookshelves, interspersed with field guides to local flora and fauna. A faded photograph on the mantel showed Marcus at 12, proudly holding up a largemouth bass, while his uncle beamed beside him. That was the summer before everything fell apart, before the argument that had severed their relationship for a decade. Now Richard was gone, and all that remained were unanswered questions and this unexpected inheritance. Marcus pulled out his phone, checked for service, 1 bar, barely, and called his colleague Elena. "I'm staying," he said when she answered. "What?" "The clinic needs you, Marcus. Mrs. Abernathy is asking for you specifically, and the reasoning hearing is Friday. I found something in Uncle Richard's papers. The development company trying to bulldoze our clinic, Lakeside Ventures. They've been after this property for years. Same company, same tactics." "That's not a coincidence," Elena said after a long pause. "No," Marcus agreed, watching an osprey dive into the lake and emerge with a fish. "It's not." He spent the night sorting through his uncle's meticulous records, discovering that Richard had been more strategic than sentimental. The environmental trust wasn't just about protecting nature. It was legal armor against predatory development. Richard had created a complex web of conservation easements, watershed protections, and wildlife corridors that effectively made the lake undevelopable without unanimous approval from multiple environmental agencies. At dawn, Marcus walked the property boundaries, referring to the hand-drawn map. Near the northern edge, he discovered something that wasn't on any official record: a small cemetery with headstones dating back to the 1800s. A weathered sign identified it as the final resting place of the lake's original indigenous inhabitants. His uncle had apparently maintained it for decades, honoring a promise made to the elders who had first shown him the healing properties of certain plants that grew only along this shoreline. Everything began making sense. Why Richard had fought so hard, why developers were so persistent, and why the clinic's forced relocation suddenly seemed connected to Marcus's inheritance. This wasn't just prime real estate, it was a pharmaceutical goldmine of rare medicinal plants. As the morning mist rose from the water's surface, Marcus made a decision. He would honor his uncle's legacy by protecting both this land and the inner-city clinic that served those who needed it most. First, though, he needed to understand exactly what he was up against and who Deborah Harrington Brooks was. County Assessor Wilson spread the property maps across Marcus's patio table, her fingers tracing boundary lines with practiced precision. Officers Jenkins and Dawson stood on either side, while Deborah hovered nearby, her earlier confidence visibly eroding. These blue markings indicate the original Richardson property lines from 1967, Wilson explained, and these red ones show the additional parcels acquired between 1985 and 2010. Officer Dawson nodded. Richard was smart. Every time developers tried pushing in, he'd buy another buffer zone. That can't be right, Deborah interrupted, leaning closer to the maps. Our subdivision prospectus clearly stated that Lakeside Heights residents have exclusive access to the eastern shoreline, including development rights for docks and boat slips. Wilson adjusted her glasses. Your developers obtained a limited-use easement in 2014. Mrs. Harrington Brooks. They paid for access rights, not ownership. There's a significant legal difference. A flash of headlights swept across the gathering as another vehicle rolled up the driveway. A man in an expensive suit emerged, his face flushed with exertion as he hurried toward them. That's my husband, Mitchell, Deborah said, visibly relieved. He's an attorney with Lakeside Ventures. Marcus felt a cold realization wash over him. Lakeside Ventures, the same company trying to redevelop the East Side Medical District. Mitchell Harrington Brooks straightened his tie as he approached. Deborah, what's going on? I was in the middle of a conference call when Ken called saying there was some emergency. His eyes darted from the officers to the assessor, finally settling on Marcus with visible confusion. This man claims to be Richard Richardson's nephew, Deborah explained, and apparently there's some question about the lake ownership. Mitchell's expression shifted subtly. Dr. Richardson, from the community clinic downtown. Marcus nodded slowly. The same clinic your company is currently trying to evict. An uncomfortable silence descended. Officer Dawson cleared his throat. Well, ain't that an interesting coincidence? The county assessor, sensing the tension, tapped a section of the map. As I was explaining, the Richardson Trust owns not only the lake itself, but also holds conservation easements on these wetland areas. Any development would require environmental impact studies and approval from both the trust and state agencies. Mitchell loosened his collar, unsure we can come to some reasonable arrangement. Lakeside Ventures has always been committed to responsible development. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Dr. Richardson. After your wife called the police on me for swooning in my own lake, I think we'll keep this official. Marcus turned to the assessor. Ms. Wilson, could you explain the legal status of the floating platforms and private docks that have been installed along the eastern shore? Wilson adjusted her glasses again. Without proper permits from both the county and the property owner, any structures extending into the lake would be considered unauthorized encroachments. Deborah paled. But we paid premiums for our lakefront lot specifically because of dock rights. Officer Dawson's radio crackled, and he stepped aside to answer it. When he returned, his expression was grim. Dispatch just informed me that we've received 17 calls in the last 10 minutes from Lakeside Heights residents. Apparently, someone has been live-streaming this entire conversation to the community Facebook group. All eyes turned to Deborah, who was still clutching her phone. On the screen, a live comment feed scrolled rapidly as neighbors reacted to the unfolding revelation about their property values and lake access rights. 300 viewers, Officer Jenkins noted, peering at the screen. That's quite an audience.